welcoming Scott Malkin. We need somebody in here who's a bit cold. Come on. No? Very good idea. Can I just have a show of hands of those people who are here for the first time? Quite a lot. Where the fuck are you? It's a very well-kept secret, but I hope it's not a secret. As you can see from the leaflet, we've got some very good people. It's coming to an end of the year. Next year we're going to have equally exciting people to come and have a conversation with me, which is called the Potential Series. And this year we've got, of course, today Scott, and next week we also have a Pure Land series, which was started by Jodie Horton, all about the pure things of life, the brain, meditation, and all that. Next week we're going to have the Mystery of the Sistine Chapel choir going to sing to calm your life and so forth if you want, if you're interested. And on the 26th of October, I've got Jonathan Newhouse, who of course owned Condé Nast, and he will be very interesting. And I think later on in November, I've got Pierre-Alexis Dumas, who is the creative director of Hermes. So we've got some very good people. Watch out for our series next year. But today, I'm very delighted to welcome Scott, who is, in my mind, a bit of a genius. And like all those geniuses who irritate me, it makes so much money that we feel very envious. How much are you worth?
Not as much as after tonight.
Listen, you come from an illustrious family. The most extraordinary thing I read about you is that your father owned the Empire State Building. I mean, when you were a child, did he own it already?
In a part.
You owned part of it. And did you ever live on the Empire State Building, or did you have an office in the Empire State Building?
No.
No? Why not? Did your father have one?
In a different building.
In a different building. Why didn't he have his own building when he owns most of it?
It was too far from the train station.
Anyway, did you see the film Sleepless in Seattle?
Yes.
Yes. And did you ever go up? Did you ever meet anybody there on the balcony of the Empire State Building?
Once.
Once. Was it a romantic rendezvous?
Yeah, absolutely.
Was it where you proposed to your wife?
No.
What happened?
I have no idea where I was, to be honest. I just showed up.
Listen,
boys who mature much more slowly than girls.
listen, you are obviously extremely well educated. You not only went to Harvard College, you went to Harvard Law School, and you went to Harvard Business School. You're incredibly qualified. Now let me ask you this. Do you think you would have done as well as you have if you had not been to any of those Harvard institutions, or indeed none of it?
So what's the none of it?
If you had not gone to Harvard?
I think they have this expression that the better educated you are, the smarter you are, and the smarter you are, the less likely you'll ever do anything of value. So I think there's a lot of overcoming education, and I think that it's quite normal in the U.S. the idea that the myth of being self-made, or the vision of being self-made, and also the truth of everyone being an immigrant. So I tend to think that acceptance of the establishment it slows you down. You have to overcome it. So on the other hand, it maybe you learn things more quickly.
In other words, you think it was a good thing that you went to Harvard, that you spent the time at Harvard, but you got to realize that that's not all there is to it. Is that your view?
Yes, I think one has to overcome it.
So as not to be either chippy or to think that you are somehow superior as a result of your education.
Yes, or that everything's just going to work out.
All right. Well, anyway, when you left Harvard, did you go straight into business?
Yes, actually, it's normal in the US, you have a lot of work experience, part-time jobs and that sort of thing. So while I was at university, I was working in the summers, and then by the time I got to graduate school, I was a little bit bored with school, so I was working full-time.
I mean, what age was it by the time you finished Harvard College, Harvard Law School, Harvard Business School? Were you about 38?
And they merged them together at the same time, so I was 24.
You're 24, very smart. When did you start that business called Rodeo Drive?
We built it in 1988.
Who is we?
It's a company that I started and some public company partners, and we built it in 1988 when I was 30.
And
87, 88.
yeah, what was the point about that particular retail business, which was your first business, really?
Yeah, so this is a project on the corner of Rodeo Drive and Wilshire Boulevard, opposite the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. It's got Tiffany on the corner, and it's a street going up the middle called Via Rodeo. So it's European, it's literally modeled on European structures, and it was unconventional because it had an internal street, and the street goes up, so every shop you go in and down or in and up. And nobody would build it today because of the Disabilities Act requirements would make it impossible to use the space, but they didn't have the rigidity of those requirements at the time. So we could say to a brand, come in and you can have all this extra space below or above, which actually makes it a lot more usable and affordable. And I would say that the conception of retail in the US at the time, most of which has migrated to generic commoditized department stores or online, was that you would have a regional mall in a very predictable format, and this was fashion. This was international brands, fashion brands, and the discovery was that the coolest part of retail was fashion because it was about creativity and expression, and fashion was really about women, particularly women traveling long haul as tourists. And the Rodeo Drive project was actually built and designed for Japanese tourism at the time. That was the dominant source of traffic coming into Los Angeles.
And that was why Soka bought you out, is that right?
That's correct. They were going to put their own store in there. And
so it was a real estate project to develop Rodeo Drive, so you made it famous.
Well, Rodeo Drive was quite famous, but this gave a concentrated hub on it. And Rodeo Drive today is, in fact, when you land in Los Angeles, you come in from the long haul through customs. On the wall is a huge mural of it, and the airport, the postcards are of it. So it's a symbol of
I mean, it's like Fifth Avenue, it's like Bond Street, it's like, what's that, Via, whatever it is, in the Spanish Steps in Rome.
Condotti.
What?
Condotti.
Condotti, thank you very much. I'll ask you for it. Right? Next time, I was just going to blurt it out. So after that, did you make a lot of money as a result of that sale?
Actually, it was. We were young, and we got into the project by doing work rather than being.
So you were in the mid-30s, by the way.
No, it was 30.
You started in the 30s.
No, it was 29, 30.
Yeah.
We sold it, and we made our investors some money, and then the property market, global property market, and banking market collapsed. So the good news was we didn't collapse with it, and we made our investors some money. So the bad news was that the property world entered 4 or 5 years of intense depression. But the good news was we had got legitimate just before, so we could then convince people that they weren't taking an inordinate risk by going to Bicester Village with us.
So how did you go from a very smart Rodeo Drive opposite Beverly Wilshire Hotel, where what's that film?
Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman. Yeah, I knew I'd remember that. Pretty Woman. When did Pretty Woman come out? Was it about the same time?
Just a bit after, yes.
A bit afterwards, so you were very lucky. So how did that make you come to London?
I had this idea that London, Tokyo, and New York were the hub cities. And at the time, everyone in the US talked about the Tokyo takeout. That meant you could sell anything to people coming from Japan as long as you got the currency right on the day, and the deals always got done because everybody was always then going to Disney World, and so they didn't have a lot of time to stick around. And so I went to Tokyo and lived in Japan for a month and did a lot of things at the time weren't normal for Westerners. Lived with Japanese families and wandered around. And then we got on the plane. So believe it or not, my wife was with me, and we got on the plane. And she said, "That was great. I'm really glad we did it. I'm not going back anytime soon."
Was it the food, or was it the fact that nobody spoke?
It was both of those, and plus she's 5'10" and has blonde hair, so everywhere we went, there were people were pointing at her. And so we went to London, because in New York, being aged 29, 30, everyone said, "Come back when you grow up." Everyone was smarter than we were and more successful than we were.
And in those days, the Japanese were also very good purchasers in London.
They were purchasing everywhere, that's right.
Yeah. So what happened then? So where did this Bicester Village idea spring from?
It comes really from fashion, the link between fashion and tourism and experience, and very directly from Rodeo Drive. So the logic of the same brands creating the same kind of experiential journey, creating a destination, but outside of the centre of London, an hour from Harrods, not across the street from Harrods, so that the brands could dispose of their surplus in an elegant way, but not compete with their own full price distribution.
How did you find Bicester? I mean, you being American probably couldn't even pronounce it, let alone find it. Or Bicester. Did you call it Bicester?
Well, I lived in Massachusetts for 8 years, and we have Gloucester and places like that, so it worked out all right. But Bicester was a bit of a black spot on the map because the M40 had just opened and people didn't really understand what it would become. And Bicester was a garrison town, best known for Friday night fighting and takeout food. But it was close to so many highlights of tourism in Britain. It was convenient to Heathrow, and we had the idea that somewhere aligned with on the west side of London near White City, because maybe the press would pay attention, Heathrow, maybe the brand executives would come visit, and then en route to the Cotswolds and Blenheim and Waddesdon. That felt like a good idea in terms of tourism, and happily it worked out.
So you really looked at the map and you decided that Bicester was the right destination.
We did, and we actually looked at other locations around the UK for a second, and then we decided we'd rather be the best in the UK, and ironically and happily became the best in the world while in the UK. And so our next jump
What year was that?
That was, we opened in '95, and we jumped to Spain and France from then.
And it was an immediate success.
I like the story about the guy who sold Blockbuster, Wayne Huizenga, who said, having sold it for a big title, a big price, and headlines everywhere, he said, I worked 6 years, 24 hours a day, night and day, 7 days a week, to wake up this morning and read the newspaper and discover I'm an overnight success. So it took a lot of work, and some of the people that worked very hard.
Where was number two? After Bicester, where did you go?
So Barcelona, and then jointly Madrid and Paris, and then 2 or 3 years after Bicester.
Yeah, but then you started building more Bicester Village in Germany, is that right?
So we've built 9 in Western Europe. We had the idea that we could look for hubs for the international tourism trail, and we thought if we aimed for 9, we'd be lucky to get 3 or 4, and we were very fortunate we got all 9. The 9th was Kildare Village outside of Dublin, and that was very much based on the idea that Ireland would reinvent itself as an international tourism hub and economy as it evolved from... Ireland, of course, went from pre-industrial or agricultural to post-industrial or technological, and skipped the industrialization.
And they're all called Bicester Village?
They're called Kildare Village or La Vallée Village outside of Paris, and Marne-la-Vallée as part of the Disney complex there. So the word village is consistent, but the name of the place is always matched with village. Yes.
And I mean, I just didn't think that, I mean, I can understand Cologne or Frankfurt, but Düsseldorf, I mean, how come that became, I mean, I thought only Mercedes-Benz people go there.
So we have 3 projects that serve Germany. They all serve the southern part of Germany because that's where fashion lives. And in the north, I actually came this morning from Hamburg, and
people live very nicely, but behind walls and inside their homes and cars. And the fashionable women of Hamburg actually historically have gone to Paris to shop because they don't want to be seen shopping for fashion in Hamburg, which leads one to say, well, why would the brands bother to have stores in Hamburg? And that's because there are windows on the brand and the identity of the brand to promote the brands and the awareness of the brand. So we went to the south because fashion is more of a southern attitude, and so we have Bavaria outside of Munich and Ingolstadt, where Audi is headquartered. We have Wertheim on the way to Würzburg, to the west, to the east of Frankfurt, and then we have just at the intersection of Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands, we have Maasmechelen, just down the road from Maastricht. And that serves Düsseldorf, and Düsseldorf has a big expat population, a lot of, and of course the trick is both the expats but all the Franken come to visit them. That's the goal.
The predicate that is a popular tourist attractions or destinations. So roughly, your customers, how many percentage would you say were visitors and how many local?
So there are two parts to that answer. One depends on the location, so I'll give you some examples of that. And the other is that the vision we had from the beginning was that the woman for whom we built and operate these projects, that no matter where she lives, whether it's halfway around the world or just down the road, when she's with us, she feels like she's made a journey and she's reached an oasis and she's escaping from her normal existence. And so that sense of relaxation, that sense of enjoyment, which I think all great shopping experiences attempt to generate, that's our goal wherever she is. So if she's a global traveler, even if she lives down the road, we hope to welcome her as a visitor. But the practical answer is that very often the majority of people coming are not even residents of the country where we operate. So we have a project north of Barcelona on the Costa Brava, and 75–80% of the people who come to visit us are non-Spanish. We have a project in the Disney Paris complex. It's about 60–70% are not French. Bicester Village outside of London is about 65–75% without an EU passport, so they come from outside of the EU. And that, sometimes it can be off-putting if you're a local and you feel a little bit like you're not at home. But there was this wonderful Wall Street Journal piece that ran in August one year when they were filling the paper up, and a guy called me up on the phone somewhere. I was in an airport probably, and he says, "I'm going up there, what's it all about?" And I said, "Well, tourism and visitors." And he said, he was going to write a piece saying that's nonsense. And he got on a train and came up. We have a train link that goes directly to Bicester Village. Actually, the stop is called Bicester Village. It goes out of Marvin Station. And it's the first new link to London in over 100 years. It connects existing lines, and the traffic is such that they could support the expansion of the train line. But I read the piece, of course, and he describes how he was sitting on the train going up with all these people from all around other countries, and on the way back he was sitting next to some fellow from Brazil who said he'd been in Britain for a week, but he'd saved all his money for this one trip. And he spoke to some people from Korea while he was there, and he quoted them as saying, "We've lived in Britain 6 or 8 years, and we love coming here because since we really know about Britain, we've lived here 7–8 years. The beautiful thing about being here is we know we're not in Britain. We know we're in an international place where every nationality can feel at ease." So this notion of embrace is really fundamental to experience, and as technology revolutionizes and disrupts everything we know, that embrace is the key thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are about 30 or 40 million Chinese who visit Bangkok or Thailand, and yet you are building, or you have built one center in China, in Suzhou, just outside Shanghai, and you're opening one in Shanghai in a couple of years' time. And yet, what you've just told us is that you are going to cater for more tourists. So, first question is, are you going to think about Bangkok, because that's where all the Chinese are? And in building Suzhou and Shanghai, are you expecting your main customers not from China, but from visitors?
So we're focused on the high-end traveler, and at the moment, the high-end Chinese traveler comes to Europe, actually, and might make a short break trip around Asia, but I'll call the shopping trips, the cultural trips. You know, the vision I have of the Chinese mantra is, as they look at Europe, we want what you have, the experience, the eventually earn the freedom and the right to embrace these other adventures. In China, Suzhou is a famous domestic tourism hub. The saying there is, in the sky above we have heaven, and here on earth we have Suzhou and Hangzhou. And Shanghai Village, which we've opened actually this spring as part of the Disney Shanghai complex, again is a national commitment, national government commitment, or central government commitment to creating tourism flows, which will include inbound tourism to Shanghai. And in fact, they were extremely deliberate and clever in distinguishing and differentiating Shanghai Disney from Hong Kong Disney or Paris Disney. So I think the answer is we're looking for that sophisticated Chinese traveler inside that vast ecosystem. The key with China is we want to be in places where the brands distribute directly, because we want to be completely aligned with the brands. So when they go through middlemen, distributors or licensees in the Middle East or other parts of Asia, there's a risk of conflict, and we've stuck to direct distribution markets.
They say in China that you live in Hangzhou because it's very beautiful there, and you eat in Guangzhou because the food is very good, but you marry in Suzhou because all the girls are most beautiful, and you die at Laozhou where the wood is very good for your coffins. And Suzhou has proved to be very successful.
Happily, yes.
Yes, and I mean, there are going to be so many Chinese tourists. I mean, last year I think 120 million people left China on a trip. So is that where your main expansion plan is going to try to capture?
But we marry our vision with the brands and what they do at full price. So they continue to make most of their profits in the West. The business that we are in is commoditized and systematized in the US and was well evolved before we started in Europe. So in a sense, the die was cast there, and I think it's gone a completely different direction in terms of protecting brand equity and supporting margins for brand product at full price. In Europe and in the US, that's where the brands make money. They're losing money everywhere else as they try to figure out how to make money and as they build their growth. So I think we're tier 1 cities only in China, and tier 1 product only, and we'll work on, we're definitely the tortoise, not the hare, so we'll work on getting that right and help the brands make money here in Europe.
I know that you mentioned the emphasis of the word village, which is present in every single place you start, and you want to embrace the idea that when people come there, come to a village. But isn't your secret contained in just one word, without which you would not have been so successful? And in my mind, as I told you at that conference in Monte Carlo, you are only going to be, or you are going to be, the most successful operator in China. And that word is discount. Now, we Chinese live by discount. We have a phone, we have our iPhone that has an app that tells you exactly the rate of exchange at that moment before we buy anything. And there's a very famous story of a very rich man who was kidnapped in Hong Kong just before 1997, Mr. Walter Kwok. And the kidnapper rang up his wife, not a billionaire, Wendy Kwok, and said, "I've got your husband, and we're going to kill him unless you give us 50 million US. And Mrs. Kwok thought for a moment. She said, "How about 30? That contains in me the DNA of this across the board of the Chinese nation. And I think, I don't want to cheapen the idea that you're a discount store, but people flock to Bicester flock to all those things because they think they're going to buy the Prada, the Christian Dior, the Loro Piana, the Piane, all those wonderful brands at a discount. And quite rightly, half of these brands, some of the things they actually can't get rid of. We all know about, sales through, sometimes they don't work and so forth. So you have actually kept it. So will you confess that the secret of your success is this contained in this word discount?
So I think there are two parts to the answer. First is no. The secret.
Admit the first part. Yes, first. Yes.
The secret is value for money, not discount, because discount suggests
But
cheap.
it's the same word. Let's be frank. That's the PR phrase. Value for money. That's the bullshit name for discount. What is value for money? Is because you think you're buying something for less than what you're getting. So there's a discount. Are you Indian?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Your nation understands discount more than anybody else. It's extremely tiresome.
How many people here have been to one of our villages?
I think they've all been.
So they actually are villages. Firstly,
Let's have a vote of hand. You go there thinking you're going to get a discount. Oh, you greasy lot. The most elegantly dressed woman confesses. With your earring, your chartreuse, your sunglasses, your lipstick, your hair. That's the woman who is speaking the truth. What is the second part of the question? And you agree?
that the marriage of experience and price, value for money, because the price equation is shifting, so that price is not the only determinant. The reason is the internet. Because actually, if you want something cheaply, you have an app on your phone that can find it, or you can take a picture of it, and that's, the technology is rapidly
I
shifting.
know, but the Chinese travel is exactly that. They take a picture, I've seen it at Bicester Village at display, and they immediately send it to China. And the China people will gather around and say, okay, one of those, and two, it's like it's sort of take away, you know, one number 2, 2 number 22, and 1 egg fried rice. That's what they do. Of course, also, you are incredibly lucky because, you know, there is this app called Daikao, as you know, which is to buy on behalf of other people. So the 100 million people who left would get orders, and then they smuggle everything back. Now the Chinese government is cotton on to this, and they're absolutely clamping down. And that particular app has collapsed for being 3 billion hit to nothing, because you now are warned that if you were to smuggle things in without declaring, you will be arrested. So that's fantastic for you because of the price point again. But look, listen, I don't want to hog everybody. We only got 35 minutes. Anybody got another question to make sure that he agrees that it is a discount, that is a secret of success? Yes, lady there, Chinese.
Hi, I was looking at the brands you offer for places, and for example, just the Shanghai Village, honestly, the brands are kind of disappointing. For example, Bicester here, you have McLean, you have Dior, you have Rodeo, actually, and there you have kind of no real. And I do agree.
Which place is this?
Shanghai Village.
Well, it hasn't started yet, is it?
Bicester has like the nice brands, but Shanghai doesn't. I just wonder when you talk to brands.
Wait 1 minute.
So Shanghai is just open. Suzhou has those brands, as you saw, and Shanghai will have them. But what often happens for the brands is they're nervous in the beginning about publicity. So with all of the attention for Shanghai Disney opening and all of the journalists that would go, if you're a very high fashion or high value brand, you come after the publicity. And that's exactly what happened at Bicester. That's what happens normally in our villages. So in the end, the environment, not necessarily the experience, David's point, but the environment is to marry with the price so that the brand can say, well, if we do have surplus, we still have enormous respect for our product and for our customer. So you'll see all those brands are starting to flow in now. They'll really come in after Chinese New Year.
But we had in Suzhou, which is more remote and didn't have that burst of publicity, those brands came from more or less from the beginning.
So by 2018, when Shanghai will be completely finished, they will see as many brands as there are in Suzhou.
Yes, and you'll see the similar brands, because we're serving our models to serve those same brands, whether it's outside of London or outside of Shanghai.
Okay, so wait, don't be disappointed. Yes, the Indian.
Thank you for that. Well, just to kind of go on and extend what David just said in terms of your secret, I think, Scott, the secret is that people think they're coming for a discount, but actually don't get it.
That's even worse.
What do you think?
So he's accusing you of conning people. I mean, are you also a discount house and also like duty free, I suppose, in a way, because they don't pass on the duty free to you, they add on, but the add-on is less than what the retail is, so there's a little bit of sleight of hand.
And therefore the brands really don't mind it, because they know that people are coming here for a discount, they're coming with that mental mindset. And I'm not, nothing against you, by the way, I'm talking against actually the brand. Is that the brand is thinking, oh fine, we are really capturing an audience which actually would have not come because you're tracking them as a discount.
Well, I think there are 3 points. Firstly, we actually police and enforce the stock as being original or authentic and the price savings being real, and average 33%, 35% at Bicester Village. So they can't just be discounted, it can't be, if you like, grey market, because the reductions have to be greater than that.
Sure.
So the way we track that is 2 parts. We have a lot of retailers who work for us, we're really a retail organization. And then we actually have a licensing agreement with the brand, not a lease. So we can ask the brand to leave, we can ask the brand to relocate. So that's agreed from the beginning that the purpose is authentic stock with real savings. However, the psychology point is absolutely right, because if you go on a weekend, you'll see, I was there today, by coincidence, and the journalist was telling me that the journalist up there, he was saying that he had talked to a driver who had driven him, and this was part of his due diligence, and he was talking to the driver that he knew about taking people up to Bicester, and they leave in the morning, they get there at 9:30, these were women from China in this particular example, and he thought he'd be a quick turnaround, they'd be home time for tea, and he left at 10 o'clock at night. But the point is, the car, and the petrol, and the driver possibly cost as much as the savings of goods. So it's a balancing act, and if you go on the weekend, you'll see a lot of men sitting in people carriers, reading and watching TV, waiting for them, and they're all sent by concierges from hotels.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, the guests, when they arrive, they're greeted, we've got VIP rooms, we've got ways of trying to create a great welcome and create an environment so that people will stay. And then I think the third point is that for people who love fashion and love brands and product and understand product, where can you go other than the West End and find fashion in Britain in that concentrated form with a wonderful, welcoming experience? And of course, the nature of fashion is quite intimidating. And if you walk into a store on Bond Street, you might get a kind of stern gaze. That's the Pretty Woman plot line. And in Bicester Village, it's meant to be a lot more accessible, emotionally and in practice. So the balance of those things are that we celebrate fashion. The savings are authentic, but the time and the cost, time is cost, right? And the cost of transport and all of those things are real.
Yeah.
And yet, to your point, people don't value them the same way if they enjoy the journey. They
Yeah.
make the trip.
Yeah.
They say, I had a great day there. I know a fellow who went there with his daughter and her boyfriend. And that was his way of spending time with them, as opposed to sitting in a restaurant in London, which they'd already done. And the outing has its own value.
Sure.
Smart question, but even smarter answer.
Of course.
That was a very, very good answer about the hidden value of what they spend. But I think your first point is very important. People trust that you are selling the real stuff, because half of the stuff you find in Hong Kong, you could be open to question, and people want the authentic, the real McCoy. Yes, the lady like that.
Oh,
Very smart
I'm very
person.
sure that Miss May is very happy having you here in the country.
Who's that?
Bringing in all of those tourists and all that revenue, so well done to you. So,
Are you paying tax?
I mean, the products are beside the point, in my opinion. So you're bringing in a lot of revenue to every country you go into, and you know, you've used your initiative to get to this point in your life and your business's life, and everybody likes the product, obviously, because they go and they keep coming back. So well done.
So it's not a question. All right. Are you related? Yes.
Did you have difficulty at the beginning in enticing the big brands to come to Bicester? And there is still one big brand name that I think remains elusive.
What's that?
Louis Vuitton, who don't discount anywhere at any time.
So it was, for sure, the brands were cautious and they didn't come. Right? Partly the publicity point and partly the testing. Because our concept was know what was going on in the US, and anyway, these brands were typically European, and they had some US-based executive in the US telling them how the US worked, but they really felt they knew well how Europe worked, and they have very strong views. So it took time to build trust and to build a relationship and to demonstrate that we were primarily focused on their brand equity and building their brand equity. So what does that actually mean? That means if Bicester Village is working well, a woman walks in, shopping's only about women, sorry guys, and let's say she's Chinese, she walks in and she's greeted by a member of staff who speaks Chinese, who says, "Welcome to Bicester Village. How can I help you? Where are you from?" And the woman says, "I'm from Guangzhou," and that salesperson says, "Well, fantastic, we actually have a superb full-price store in Guangzhou, and if you would like, I'll give you my card and I'll write on the back of it the name of the manager of the Guangzhou boutique. And when you go to Guangzhou, when you go home and you give my card to the manager, you'll be treated as an honored guest and given special privileges. And by the way, if you like, if you give me your email address right now, I'll just type it in and send the manager an email right now and copy you, and you'll know you've been introduced correctly." Well, at that point, a number of things have happened, not least of which is the brand owns the data and has created a full price lead back to Guangzhou. We say that Bicester Village is Terminal 6. It's the shopping without the airplanes, and so there's no enforced departure. But it is in that sense meant to be very international, very comfortable, and very much about the experience the brands can offer. I think that in the end, for all brands, the brand you mentioned, for example, is in Terminal 5 now, for all brands, they need to find and build a relationship with their target consumer. And if we have, Bicester Village will have 7 or 8 million people this year, 2/3 of them, 3/4 of them will be from outside of the EU. So call it 5 million non-EU long-haul shoppers coming to Bicester Village. There aren't many places a brand can find 5 million target customers flowing through. So we will work with you. You've seen a number of luxury brands continue to find ways to open in Bicester Village, and we'll work in as creative a way as we can to serve the brands. Fundamentally, our brand promise, our customer is the brand, the shopper is our guest. And our brand promise is to serve and protect the brands. And fingers crossed, we'll grow in that way. By the way, if you have a friend working for Vuitton, and sometimes they have friends and family sales in Vuitton, Chanel in Paris, and you can see the pictures of the...
Is it the elusive one?
Absolutely. David could help you.
I'm sure that they will start selling clothes, because I don't think Louis Vuitton's clothes sell as much, and eventually they will succumb. Luggage, they might stand fast, but you watch, they will all eventually be seduced, because the chairman will only look at the figures, and when that dip, the soldiers will have to go out to find ways and even try to hide it from the fact. But how about Marks and Spencer? Are they there?
It's not
Have
our
you approached
target.
them?
It doesn't really fit our vision of how we serve our customers.
Oh, so you would turn Marks and Spencer's down?
politely.
I think they're going down the tube because they try to sell clothes in white light. It's very difficult to pretend you look rather nice in a lingerie in white light. Or underpants, but there it is.
Hi, Scott. Two-part question, really. One, do you think you benefited from the model of retailing or brands going into retail as opposed to the wholesale licensing and franchise thing that's happened since the 90s, to move to directly operated stores and therefore being left over with a lot of stock? And the second part of that question is, if there's a move away from that trend to this sort of more digital experiential brand shift, do you think you're going to be ending up with fewer products coming through this?
So the first answer to the first part is absolutely. We exist because the brands took control of their identity and want to drive the positioning of their identity and build the equity in that identity. And so they do have directly controlled surplus, but they also want to make sure that that surplus doesn't seep out into a grey market or into users who don't represent the brand and the values of the brand. The second point is that there are two fundamental reasons why the sale of surplus online will never be a sustainable proposition. The first is that it's too convenient, it's too accessible, right? So if you're selling your brand, and by the way, the trend towards brands taking charge, particularly in the US where the department stores have commoditized and made themselves generic, you want to be able to define the brand. You can't rely on Saks or one of these brands, one of these department stores to do it for you. But if you are a brand and you're committed to the West End, to Harrods, you don't want the person in the store with David's app to be looking up right on the app that item from last season and just shipping it home while you're standing inside the West End's full price store. The second point is that this is the open secret about digital retail. Unless you're selling your own merchandise, unless you control the vertical chain through to distribution, no one makes money selling as a retailer online. If they do make money, they're fudging their books and they're barely making money relative to the volume. So everyone tells you, Amazon is selling billions and they don't make money from retail. When they do, which is only recently, it's accounting. Right? They make money from the cloud. They make money from owning your data. They make money from streaming you films. And they make money from building their platform and spreading their costs. Fashion, in fact, retail generally isn't making money for Amazon. Net-a-Porter doesn't make money. Yoox doesn't make money from selling clothing. And the reason is it's very difficult to make money in the first place, being a retailer, selling other people's product. And then you now have to be an omni-channel retailer, which means you've got to cover everything. And you've got to be regional, and then you've got to be global, or you get edged aside and people won't take you seriously. And then this whole notion of experience, of physical experience, with transparency, right? Distributed trust. You want to put the number of people that will rent their houses, their flats, never having seen the renter on Airbnb, or the number of people that are speaking up about hotel rooms on travel websites. You just look up and get the information and you decide what's acceptable. So someone goes to this talk, and if they don't like the talk, they're tweeting. If they're stuck in a queue at Heathrow, they're tweeting. So you actually know one thing for sure. We all know one thing for sure about experience. And that is, on the one hand, experience is everything. And on the other hand, whatever counts as satisfactory experience today, we are all certain will not be good enough next year, as the bar keeps rising. And the resulting increase in complexity and cost squeezes out the margins. So I think that for the brands, they're entering a very tumultuous period. It's easily seen. For the traditional suppliers of the industry or service providers in the industry, Condé Nast, the big magazine groups, now you've got bloggers sitting in the front row, and you've got Philip Klein holding Studio 54, whatever it is, a fashion show. The whole game is shifting. That world is shifting. And what's absolutely not changing is that the fragility of brand equity is more important than ever. And the online sellers are starting to open stores. So Amazon's opening, take a moment, bookstores, physical bookstores. Haven't wiped out most of them. And it's not because it's to drive their brand and their relevance, and they'll also have pickup of the packages, all sorts of things. But physical retail is reconfiguring, and it's becoming more expensive. Not good news. And by the way, food, right? Who's the biggest threat to Marks and Spencer? Food? Well, actually everybody, because they're not doing online food. But everyone's going towards delivery of food from online purchasing, and the big threat for everyone is Amazon Fresh, who actually aren't in it to make money. They're in to own your data and to control a platform. I was just telling you, I was in Los Angeles until just came back, and a senior venture capitalist in San Francisco was saying in Palo Alto, he will not use Google search because he doesn't want Google to know anything about it. So they'll only use search engines that purport not to record your data and not to use cookies. And that's quite interesting. This is right in the industry who's investing in all these startups that are using all the tools he doesn't want touching him personally. So we're entering a very period of dramatic change. Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, was very stubborn about whether tourists were guests or enemies when they were interviewed at customs, right? Is it a police function? Or is it an economic function? Or is it a UK PLC brand question? It's a complicated world. So I think we're, touch wood, we happen to have something that provides an ongoing service, and we're trying to constantly reinvent and differentiate our experience from what we did last year. I love this concept that our biggest competition, I would argue, our pure and deadly competition is doing what we do in a mediocre fashion. We've got to keep staying in front of people's expectations and competing against ourselves.
Well, I echo what you say. I think Net-a-Porter suddenly realized they had to open shops because people want to feel the garments they're buying. I mean, eventually people got fatigued, just trying to buy everything online. And the other point about all these internet companies that I've never understood, because in the history of mankind and commerce, no, what's that business called, where you, catalog business, where you write off, what was it called? Mail order business. I mean, all it is just speed it up, right? So having to send it off, and so the internet just speed it up. Nobody in the history of time has ever made money because of the delivery cost. So I was never amazed. I was never surprised that Amazon never made money. And by the time they work on the logistics and the robots and so on, that's another millions and billions of cost. And I was surprised that just as Richmond had a big mail order business, got rid of it because they didn't make money, they bought Net-a-Porter. And then now they've had to combine it with Yokes or whatever it's called, which is a sort of discount store, and they've opened the shop. So all these things are really articulating that the internet sales increases are not as simple as people make it out to be.
The big piece on the internet, which people don't really talk about, they don't discuss it in any open way, is the level of returns is extraordinarily high.
Yes.
So I was sitting next to, if you want to have a comical image in mind, there I was at the Burberry fashion show 2 weeks ago in London, and obviously I'm a fashion creature, and I was sitting next to with a friend who is quite fashionable, and after the show, because it's runway to immediate order, so she's more or less ordering what she liked while we're sitting there, and it all arrived a couple of days later, and I know how much she ordered, and it was more than she told me she had, and she returned virtually all of it. And she just wanted to see how it was made, and she wanted to try it on, and she ordered several sizes of each item. And for a brand, that's just another level of complexity and price. For Bicester Village or its sister villages, that's good news because they can't resell it as new. So it ends up...
My wife returns 98% or 99%, sometimes even she might have worn something.
105%?
I don't want the police going around, but that's the reality. And I raised this point at that big conference in Monte Carlo, and of course they say, well, of course we take into account of returns, which is between, in net-a-porter, between 30 to 50%, and that's a big number, and they don't want to admit it. And so, you know, there's a bit of mafia going on. Yeah, sorry.
Two questions, if I may. Operators like Nike and Adidas, are they a commercial anchor necessity, or do they really fit in your centres, or wherever centres generally? Secondly, obviously you've got very long dwell time and fairly limited space. How are you dealing with the food and beverage offer, and particularly allowing your clients to celebrate their purchases?
Nike, other sports brands, Adidas, we're not really designed for them. You will find them in a more mass market outlet configuration alongside Marks and Spencer and others. I think that Tory Burch and other points, brands like Polo Ralph Lauren, they all approach sport in different ways. And the genius of branding and fashion was Steve Jobs, because he took a piece of hardware and made it a fashion item. So there are moments where that kind of look is fashion. And you've seen it, particularly with the States are calling it athleisure, but Juicy Couture has morphed into Lululemon and all these things. So the notion of fashion constantly shifts and changes, but the authenticity of those sports brands is that they are for athletes. And the positioning of those brands is driven towards athletes. I was fortunate to spend a day at Under Armour in Baltimore. And one could say that Baltimore is Under Armour now. It's the only good news story of Baltimore other than sports teams in 20 years. And when you get embraced into their culture and you understand how they think and what they're doing, it's not about fashion. Fashion is an unrelated, it's a random outcome. So we're not, you won't find those brands in our villages typically. You won't find them at Bicester Village. And sorry, the second, food and beverage, yeah. So you can't design for peaks. You can design for, so we're designing for a weekday where the women our goal is that the women come with their families. The next day they come with their sisters, their friends, their mothers, without the children, without the husband, without the crush on the weekend. And we're delivering, so Nick Jones, who's one of David's illustrious speakers, we have a Soho farm shop at Bicester Village. We have other places that hopefully can produce a very nice salad and a good glass of wine, and on the weekends they're just going to be overflowing. The celebration point is we do have a VIP logic, and we try hard to celebrate fashion and celebrate our guests who are enjoying and embracing fashion. So we can do that to an extent, but it's an aspiration to try to transmit that to everyone and every guest who comes.
So you wouldn't mind a Chinese restaurant, a good one, just a little.
Very good.
Okay. Where were you for the summer holidays this year?
I had a daughter get married, so I was working.
How about the year before? I'm just trying to find out what you do for your holidays.
Southern Lake Michigan, where my wife's family's from. So the Lake Michigan looks like the sea, but it's freshwater, no sharks.
So nothing glamorous at all.
I can safely say that the most glamorous thing I've done for some long period of time is sit up here with you, David.
Yes, good evening. Where do you see the next growth opportunities? Is it more villages somewhere in the world, or would you consider doing other things within the value retail?
We really think we're in the business of serving fashion and luxury brands, and we did that at Rodeo Drive, which was a full price solution. We do it in our villages at Outlet. I think that the pace of change, so fashion and tourism are intrinsically linked, and now that's tied to experience in an ever more powerful way. We're busy hiring hoteliers, so we're in theory a real estate company which is overwhelmingly populated by retailers, and now we're injecting hoteliers, and you can tell it's working because all the retailers and the real estate guys, men and women, are very frustrated. hospitality is a good idea, but it's rather intrusive in practice. It's a good idea in theory. I think this notion of experience, tourism, and brand, fashion and luxury brand, is the future. And I think our skill, realistically, is going to be in delivering that in physical environments. I think we're probably going to do, probably migrate towards full price expression of that in the West. Because if you go to the other emerging markets, there's so much money and there's so much enthusiasm that people spend irrationally. They don't think about how the markets will work, or the markets aren't well defined, or it's more about prestige. So I think there are a series of great cities in the world that matter for shopping and matter for brands. A number of them are in the US. I wouldn't be surprised if our next project is a full price project, like the Rodeo Drive project, not physically exactly like, but same brands, same vision, serving New York, Los Angeles, one of these great cities. That's what's interesting to me.
Yes. Sorry, one and there was somebody else. All right, but
do you think the non-full price model has actually brought in more revenue because people are actually buying more because they think they're getting it cheaper rather than they went to Selfridges or any also?
I think there are three parts to the answer. First of all, they are getting it for less money, that value for money point. I mean, they're spending, a woman is buying a piece of fur in one of our boutiques for thousands of pounds less than buying it if it were full price, but it's also last year's collection. It's also not of the moment, so it's, if one is fashion forward, you don't come to us. If one is brand loyal, you come to us. So that, I think, is the first point. The second point is, like a great department store, like a great brand boutique, if we make you feel happy and relaxed and inspired, you will spend more. Give you the examples. Anybody know the name Bonobos? Anybody know the brand Bonobos? Okay, there we go. Bonobos is emerging as a menswear brand in the US. It's going to supplant and replace Brooks Brothers and brands like this. Feels very much to the millennial age group. Nobody in fashion is particularly paying attention to it. The fact that nobody here recognizes it is completely normal. And I've got a friend who was taking his son to get a dinner jacket for a wedding, and he takes his son and the brother, the two boys in, and the salesman comes up, sees him coming up the stairs, because of course they don't go, they go upstairs, they don't pay as much for the real estate, and it's essentially a fitting and showroom and then delivery logic. And as he comes up the stairs, he's telling me how he says to his son, well, I'll take you to Brooks Brothers and we'll get you fitted up. And Dad, he said, Dad, we got this covered, come with us. And they walk up the stairs, and the salesman, who's another young guy, looks at the three of them and goes straight to the father, my friend, and says, welcome to Bonobos, sir. Let me just give you a chair, get you a glass. You sit right here, we'll take care of everything for your sons. Because they knew he wasn't the customer. But you can see this kind of shift. So I think that what counts as good experience is a lot about understanding culture, trends, human behavior, and feeling those vibes. Because if you offend a customer in London, she's upset in Los Angeles and Singapore, and Bonobos won't be invisible for someone for so long. And then I think that the last point is, if you journey halfway around the world to go to one of our villages, you traipse across China. China's a huge country, 1.2 billion people, and it's only on one time zone. It's a vast enterprise, and you come halfway around the world to go to one of our villages, and you're only there for a day, and you may never come back. We don't want you to come back. We want you to tell your family to come next year. Right? We want you to tell your sister to come with her daughter. You will probably, if you're treated well, and the selection of the merchandise is well edited, and the training, so we're big now into hospitality training of the shop staff, even though they don't work for us. If we do our jobs well, you will spend more. Because you're there, it's a one-time moment, your dwell time, as David said, is extended. So that's our responsibility, to make you so happy. Our job is to make women happy, to make women so happy that they spend more. By the way,
my wife went to your Bicester Village the other day because I sent her to investigate all the time. She said she was in a long queue simply because there was a Chinese who was trying to sell all available with the thing. And there were some irate people. I mean, can you not speed up the SharePoint?
So the trick always is, when people leave with opinions, everybody good, everyone tuned in has opinions. The trick always is, take the opinions and ask the question, would you go back? And if they say they would go back, and if they believe we're trying to always improve, then we're on the right track.
Go back. All right, last question. Smart one. All right, okay. I was just going to ask one last question, but you can ask it. It is the same one.
David, you talked about the Chinese consumer are very savvy with their phones and technology and whatnot. It would be good if Scott can talk a little bit about how he's relating to the very digital savvy consumer in various villages, and particularly the Chinese as well.
The guiding principle for us is never stand between the consumer and the brand. So what we want to do is support and assist the brand, and the brands are evolving at different speeds in terms of how they use the digital technology and experience. That's the first point. The second point is there are a lot of companies producing applications or machinery for shopping. So imagine you walk into a fabulous department store, you walk into Harrods, and every 3 seconds your phone pulses. And because everywhere you move, someone's zapping you with an offer. That's one service that is trying to propel itself forward. So they own they have access to you because you're connected to the Wi-Fi, or they've recognized your phone. Another example is you get off the plane in Barcelona and you get pinged about Rodeo Village, which is our village, because of something you did back in Dubai or Moscow. Or these flows are powerful, but they're confusing and easily overused. And the reality is, CRM is another open secret, right? Everybody's collecting data like crazy. Nobody's using it intelligently. How many people here have relied on Amazon book recommendations to buy your next books if you happen to be buying books on Amazon? So actually, and what I find is, so it's interesting because what I find is that music, right, Pandora, Spotify, these other groups, that tends to work better, but people buying books don't necessarily read them fully, and they don't cycle back. If you like certain music, you like it again, and so essentially it's a very messy tool, right? And a designer changes, a brand shifts focus, the data's lost and confused. So I would say that everyone's has been obsessed since the early, late 90s with the internet. Huge fortunes have been spent on the internet. Some people have spent wisely. I think Amazon does spend fortunes and spends pretty wisely. Other people spend optimistically. I was in Los Angeles. I had a tour of Elon Musk's SpaceX factory, which was pretty quirky. Well, there you are. It's like being a kid making model rockets. They're making real rockets there when you watch. So I would say that's in the prayer of making a profit. That's more remote than Amazon, but maybe it's possible. And then there are people busy trying to control our lives through technology, which I don't think will work. I think that the individual is too unwilling. So all those cookies, all that data, you can influence people, but I don't think you control them. So the long way that's the long answer. The short answer is we're addicted to technology and what technology can do, and trying to find ways to use it to support our brands and their relationships with our customers, our guests, rather than trying to use technology to sell. We're using technology to control data and sell the data. I think all of those intrusions are the opposite of creating a welcoming and memorable experience.
I think you're right, that suggestion. I mean, I tapped in Currency Conversion Table as a book, and one of the suggestions was in a furniture shop, because they thought I was looking for a table, but there it is. Okay. Well, look, listen, I think we've had some very smart answers. And my last question is, on your future coat of arms, when you're ennobled or given a gong, will the word discount appear? Please join me in